guys, and welcome to the first episode of No Rest for the Scientist. Today we're going to be talking about COVID-19. So we've had lots of questions about various aspects of the virus and a few rumours that have been circling around. So our aim today is just to make the facts a little bit clearer for you guys. So first of all, our first question was about what a virus is. A lot of people don't have a clear understanding of how viruses work. So could you just break down quickly for us what a virus is and how it can affect us?
Sure. So viruses generally are much smaller than our cells in the body, usually about 100 times smaller in fact. And they're weird in the fact that they're not classified as being living organisms. They need another host cell to actually successfully replicate properly. So in a similar way to a computer virus, it infects a host. So instead of being a computer this time, it tends to be a host cell. So that might be an immune cell in the blood or cells in the back of your throat in terms of like a flu virus, whereby it in some way hijacks components within that cell to kind of trick it into producing more of the virus. And when there's enough of that virus that's being produced, they then leave that host cell, usually killing it on the way out, and then it's ready to infect other cell types. And that's kind of how viruses spread.
Okay, so the next question is regarding face masks. I've actually seen some really hilarious videos of people on Facebook making masks out of putting a thong over their head.
Oh wow.
That was my favourite, but I've seen lots of very creative mask making, and I also heard that Trump said in one of his speeches that he thinks that wearing a scarf around your face will protect people from the virus, and that's what's going to help us to overcome this virus. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say on the masks front, because a lot of people are trying to make their own ones. So do they work? Can they help us? Can you make your own, or do they need to be a specific type?
Right, okay. Number one, don't make your own. They do not work. Just don't do it.
So not thongs then?
No. Or bags. Don't put a bag on your head. It's not going to work. You might asphyxiate yourself. It's not worth it. So my immediate piece of advice is if you're not on the front line, you don't really need a mask. So the Centre for Disease Control, or the CDC, specifically say that members of the public shouldn't wear masks. But I will give you a bit of background as to whether they are effective if you do have one or you feel more comfortable wearing one. So the general mask you see many people wearing is a surgical mask or a medical mask that tend to be blue in colour. It's important to note these were made for surgeries. The reason being is when a surgeon is operating on a patient, you want to prevent, as a surgeon, your saliva infecting the wound. And that's what that medical mask does. It's a loose fit, and it's specifically there to prevent like spit, splatters, or blood from the wound either getting into the respiratory tract of the surgeon or into the wound of the patient. Secondly, there are other masks that are used called N95s, which kind of look like this. If you've ever seen these before, if I get a bit closer for you. These are much better in terms of filtering tiny particulates out. It's called an N95 because it filters out around 95% of smaller particles in the atmosphere, basically. But again, it's 95% effective, and these are used for people on the front lines. They shouldn't be used by people in the general public. The key thing that people are forgetting about is that the virus doesn't just get through the mouth and the nose, it can infect through the eyes as well. So having a mask on in public, if someone sneezes on you, you're still very much likely to get infected. And finally, it's also important to know the people that wear these masks often touch them to rearrange them with their hands after touching, groceries or, poles or stuff in the side of the street, and then they don't wash their hands when they go home. And therefore you can touch your face with these infected gloves through any virus that might be on the mask and still get infected by that.
So you're saying with the masks, people might have got online like some dentist masks or some builder's masks or something like that, that the virus can get through that?
Yes.
Or like a homemade mask, the same?
So the N95s are far better at potentially filtering out virus particles and small particles of sneeze vapor and so on and so forth. But again, they won't be 100% effective because of your eyes being exposed. And it has to be correctly fitted. So I wear N95 qualifies for work because of the conditions I work in the lab require that, just in case I have severe allergies with some of the chemicals that I require, but it had to be professionally fitted. So you just buying some online won't be of particular help. Just leave these sorts of masks and things for doctors and nurses and carers that might have direct, consistent exposure to people that are infected.
Okay, good explanation. Okay, next question is about anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen. So is ibuprofen dangerous in terms of COVID-19?
So it's a good question, and I did actually publish something or post something online about this, potentially suggesting it could be, but I've done the digging more recently, and it turns out that it doesn't actually seem to be any scientific evidence kind of backing the claim. So the reason this came about is a letter was sent in to The Lancet by 3 well-established authors, suggesting or hypothesizing that there should be more studies into people who take anti-inflammatory drugs chronically, so over a long period of time, such as people who have hypertension or diabetes. But it's important to clarify that a hypothesis is just a question, something that should be experimented on. And this was kind of taken out of proportion by, I think it was a health minister in Canada, Olivier Véran, where the Twitter post is in French, but I'll translate it in the description or next to the image. Whereby just kind of putting forward the idea that ibuprofen is dangerous. But one of the authors actually came out and kind of, I'll quote him here rather than saying something he didn't say. This letter does not constitute a recommendation to use certain drugs or not, and patients should always follow the instructions given by their physicians. So basically, at the moment, there is no scientific claim to suggest that ibuprofen is dangerous or could potentially increase your risk of getting COVID. However, if you feel more comfortable using other pain reliefs such as paracetamol, then feel free.
Awesome. Okay, so the next thing that we have had sent in to tackle is actually a rumour. So here I've seen quite a lot of this online, that coronavirus was made in a lab. Was it?
I am going to just definitively answer immediately, no. So, interestingly, in America there was a study done, or survey even, whereby it seems that 23% of Americans think it was intentionally made in a lab, whereas an additional 6% think it might have occurred in a lab, but accidentally. And there's been studies kind of done to exemplify this fact. So one study using computers, whereby they can use a term called computer modelling to basically determine the effectiveness whereby a virus can bind to a host and successfully infect that host. And I will quote the study here, whereby the authors have basically said that their analysis predicts that the interaction is not ideal. What this basically means in scientific terms is when an interaction between a virus and a target is effective but not ideal, it highly suggests it was developed by natural selection. Viruses such as COVID and SARS, they mutate very rapidly. So this mutation is very likely to happen in nature. And another study basically showed that the DNA, so the genetic code of the COVID virus, is around 88% similar to the SARS virus, where the outbreak happened in the early 2000s, indicating that they might have mutated from each other naturally, not in a lab. So it's incredibly important to note that if there was like a dangerous warmongering lab, that they would intentionally produce a virus with a very high infection ability. And because this virus could be worse, you would immediately say that, that's probably not the case. And on top of that, a study done, I think it was last year or maybe the year before, from an American research group, looked at bats in China and actually identified that bats can harbour over 400 different coronaviruses. It's very important that COVID-19 is only one type of coronavirus and there are many others. And they basically showed us that something that's called a spillover event, which basically means the likelihood whereby a virus in an animal can infect a human appears to be far more common than we initially thought, suggesting there may be more of these infections.
Okay, so bats are possibly kind of involved. I've seen a lot of things saying that the disease or the virus was caused by someone eating a bat. So could that be the case? So
it's still an open debate. It seems that could be possible, and that was the theory by how SARS came about. in the 2000s. So whilst experimenters and researchers are currently at the moment trying to decipher where the initial infected patients became infected, initial thoughts it may have come from a wild animal market, which is possible, but ideas are now shifting away from that it may have come from somewhere else, but we're still not entirely sure on that front.
Okay, so we've had another question sent in. As an asthmatic, I would like to know how careful I should be.
Right, this is a very serious question, and the CDC and the World Health Organization have both come out and said that people with moderate to severe asthma are far more likely to get severe complications associated with COVID. The reason for this is very much likely due to the fact that the virus has large symptoms associated with the respiratory system and appear to be able to stimulate an asthma attack and pneumonia in these patients. So even more so than the general public, it is highly advised to stay at home. If you need to stock up on asthma pumps or medication, please talk to someone who can provide and give them to you, and avoid going out as much as possible.
Okay, very important. Stay inside, people. The next question that we have is a big one. It's got a big word in it and I don't know what it means. So it says convalescent therapy. So what is convalescent therapy and will it work?
Right, convalescent therapy has actually been around 100 years. It's helped eradicate polio before a vaccine came around, and it's being pushed at the moment because we currently have no vaccine for COVID. So convalescent therapy is whereby you get a patient who had COVID and then successfully recovered, preferably without any symptoms. So their immune system is very strong at tackling this virus. You take a blood sample from that patient, and then you take the liquid component. So you remove the cells, you take the liquid component, which is called plasma, you screen it to make sure it has no other infections in it, and then you basically give that to another patient who is likely to develop severe complications. For example, someone who may need a ventilator and there might not be enough of them. The reason this is done is because that plasma that's given from the hyperimmune, it's called, someone who has a very strong immunity, will have antibodies to fight back against that virus. So in theory, this plasma can help people who are at particular risk of severe complications, such as the old, the immunocompromised, such as cancer patients, but also young children, and potentially help them from mortality.
So essentially, you take a strong person's blood.
Yes.
And it's got antibodies in it.
Yeah.
And you give those antibodies to someone who doesn't have a strong immune system.
But it's not the but it's not the cells. It's just the liquid that the blood kind of circulates around the body. So around 50% of the blood is made up of this liquid called plasma, which contains antibodies and other nutrients, basically like sugars and things. But at the moment, it's not being widely used. Obviously, this is a therapy on the cusp. So there are hospitals in both the United States, but also in the UK, that are really pushing for clinical trials on this, but it's not used widely at the moment. In the US, I know that it's being used for patients whereby there are no other options, whereby it's either this therapy or potential death. It's an interesting and exciting therapy that might be available until we get a vaccine, but it's very much ongoing, and this is very much day-to-day news as a potential therapy.
Okay. Well, I feel well informed after that. I can use the word convalescent and actually know what it means. Okay, next question. It's not a question, it's a rumour, again, another rumour. The virus is not that bad, it's fine, we'll just get a bit sick and we'll carry on and everything will be fine. Is that okay?
No, it's not. So, the main argument here is the lack of testing. Okay, so most of the people that have been tested so far have been in hospital or have gone through a hospital setting. A lot of people that might have contracted the virus haven't been tested and they might have already recovered. So I think the general statistic at the moment in terms of fatality rate is between 2 to 3%. If we take into consideration the people that probably did have the virus and didn't get tested and didn't develop symptoms, that might push it down to 1%. So if you go on the CDC website, if you compare this against influenza anyway, they tell you yearly the number of people in the US that get infected by influenza. There's a varying number, I'll put it on the screen now, and you can also see how many fatalities there are in that year. And they've done this for consecutive years, I think since about 2011. And if you calculate the values, if you use basically the lowest infection rate per year but the highest mortality rate, even then COVID is around 2 times more deadly than regular influenza. So please just take advice from governments and medical professionals. Stay at home. Even if you're healthy, you going out might put other people at risk. And that's kind of the clear-cut point I want to make for this episode, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that if you are maybe, say, in your 20s and you're young and healthy like we are, do you think that we would be fine if we got the virus, like we're totally cool, or is there a chance that healthy people can still die from it? Has that happened? So
young people are dying, young nurses, doctors are dying, and these are people with no underlying health conditions. The virus will infect, and it will affect people differently, and that's important to kind of exemplify and put out there. Just because you think you have a good immune system doesn't mean you can be ready for a virus like this. Okay, just to end this episode on, I'm going to put a cool graphic up with the symptoms of COVID-19, primarily being shortness of breath, fever and a dry cough. It's also important to note that a runny nose doesn't seem to be related to the virus. This is much more likely to be just hay fever, allergies or a cold. But if you do have the symptoms or you think you might be at risk, please contact your physician. But do this over the phone. Don't go into a clinic, don't go into a hospital. Call 111 or an alternative that might be available in your country. And finally, if you want correct scientific information on this virus, the best places to go are websites. So go to the CDC website, the WHO website, and also Public Health England, whereby they're updating this on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you. We will also be putting links down below in the description which Ted has used for his research to give you guys all this information. So if you want to study along with us, then look at those links down below.
In the next episodes, so this will be next week, we'll be doing 5G. Because this needs to be clarified urgently. There's a lot of crazy stuff going around at the moment. If you want to send in your conspiracy theories or your statements or your questions about that, then please do. But for now, we're done. Please leave any comments about today, coronavirus or 5G, in the comment section below. And make sure you press like and subscribe and share it to everyone you know. And thank you for watching.
See you next week.
Bye. Bye-bye, bye-bye. Yay.